Hey guys, welcome back to Storytime with Mr. Isaiah. We are reading Sink or Swim, and right now we are starting chapter 14. So if you haven't already seen our other chapters, don't forget to go back and check those out. If you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe, click the notification bell, and leave a comment below to let me know what you think about the story. With that said, I'm going to jump right into chapter 14, Sink or Swim. The next afternoon, I was in the crow's nest on lookout again, only it was rougher seas, waves tall enough to hide a periscope half the time. Though, at least that meant a U-boat wouldn't be able to see its sights on any of our ships very well, either. But I still managed to spot another one before sonar picked it up. A periscope, no doubt about it, which meant a sub possibly preparing to launch torpedoes. I sounded the alarm, and the call to general quarters went out, our PC lurking away from the convoy to give chase before the U-boat could fire. We made slower progress through the heavy waves, so we couldn't get there in time to fire our depth chargers at the sub once it submerged. We all held our breath and scanned the ocean for any sign of a torpedo, just under the surface, blasting toward a hole riding low in the water under a full load of cargo. But there was nothing, so after a few minutes we could all exhale. I kept up my search through the binoculars, not just in the direction of the U-boat had disappeared on us, but farther afield as well. We all knew the U-boats traveled in what they called wolf packs, stalking convoys like ours. One U-boat running reconnaissance and the others somewhere ahead, setting a trap for whoever or whatever was coming. And sure enough, an hour later, there ahead of the convoy, I spotted another periscope. Once again, I gave the signal, and out went the call to general quarters. Only this time, the captain gave the order for the battery team to aim the big 3-inch 50 caliber and fire. I was surprised by how quickly they did, and seconds later there was a terrific explosion and an enormous plume of water shot up in the sky. "We got one," I yelled, though there wasn't anybody near to hear me, especially with the engines racing below and the ship hammering through the waves. "We got one." Only it quickly became apparent that we hadn't got one. We hadn't got anything. So the order went out to fire again and again. And as we drew closer, the captain also gave the order to launch depth chargers. I guess the sonar guys must have found our target by then and were able to home in on it quick. When the depth chargers detonated, it felt as if our PC was blown 10 feet straight out of the ocean. I pitched wildly on the lookout platform and thought I was going to fall off or be flung out far over the deck into the ocean. The next depth charge rocked us again. It was like riding a wild bronco, the way the ship bounced and slammed hard back down. Alarms went off, signaling men to go below for emergencies repairs, which we'd drilled for hundreds of times. The same as we'd done drills for general quarters and the rest. I searched the ocean for signs that we'd actually hit the U-boat. An oil slick, pots and pans, mattresses, bodies, but nothing came up. The convoy steamed ahead, but we held back, circling the area where we'd dropped the depth charges and shelled with forward gun. Once again, the U-boat had gotten lucky, but so had we. Our luck didn't hold for too long, though. Over the next couple of hours, those rough waves grew even rougher and more ominous as afternoon turned into evening. We caught back up to the convoy, at least for a while, but as the waves kept growling higher, pretty soon our attention turned fully to just trying to stay afloat. The storm would protect the convoy from the U-boat wolf pack, but for now, as we pressed on south through the Black Sea and sky It was every ship for itself. That wasn't a problem for the merchant ships, as big and heavy as they were, lumbering along, but it made things a lot more difficult for us PCs. We soon found ourselves climbing up the steep front of the giant waves, then cresting at the top with the bow and what seemed like the whole front half of the ship out of the water, and then racing down the other side of the swell, our propellers churning and whining until they were back under. I was long since off the lookout platform, and there wasn't any point to me doing my watch in the sonar room, since no U-boat would ever be able to attack in a storm like this. The wolf pack would be running silent and deep, waiting out the storm far below us while we battled the killer waves. Whatever sea legs guys had grown into over the last couple of weeks were gone now with waves so big. The only good thing was that the ship rode a lot higher in salt water than in fresh water, so when we plunged into the ocean at the bottom of each wave, the bow didn't go as deep as when we went through storms back on Lake Huron, and not quite as much water covered us as we bounced back up. Chief Kerr called me from the sonar room to the pilot house, where the officers on duty and the navigator ran the ship, when weather was too bad for them to be on the bridge, and on the way I realized that once again I was one of the few men on the ship who wasn't doubled over and sick. It was slow going with the howling wind and the waves on the spray. I clipped on a safety line and made my way up to the pilot house with the chief and the executive officer, who didn't look so good either. The door slammed so hard behind me that I thought it would take off my leg. I half expected Chief to tell me to take the wheel, but of course that wasn't going to happen to a seaman second class with no training, and it didn't. Instead, he wanted me to go back down to the mess and bring him back coffee and sandwiches. I might not have been seasick like most of the rest of the crew, but the idea of eating just then did make my stomach turn. But Chief just yelled the order again, and off I went, making my way from the pilot house and down the hatch to the galley, stepping carefully around sailors slumped everywhere, and stepping around where they'd puked, which wasn't entirely possible. In the mess, I filled thermoses with black coffee and braced myself as best I could to pull out bread and bologna and anything else I could grab to throw in there. Then it was back topside, holding on to the grub with one hand and the rail with the other. Every step seemed to take 5 minutes, as I got thrown side to side, 2 paces forward and 1.5 back. I was exhausted by the time I got back to the pilot house, but happy I'd finally made it, and then been able to do something to help the men who were steering as though this was awful storm. Chief Kerr just cursed and said the coffee had gotten cold, but he ate one whole sandwich in 2 bites, and then did the same with another one. The executive officer just waved me off. They let me stay in the pilot house, though, and I had a front row seat to the wild climb and fall of the ship, up and down those mountainous waves, no turning to run with the wind and the waves as we struggled to keep up with where we at least thought the convoy was. As best I could tell, we were navigating totally with instruments, except when enormous bolts of lightning split the sea in front of us and lit up the way, but only for a second. And then we were plunged back into even darker night than before until our eyes adjusted. Chief called me back over to him after another hour. I kind of had an idea about what was coming, and I wasn't wrong. More coffee, sailor, he shouted, shoving the thermos into my hands. And this time, get your sorry butt back up here while it's still hot. The storm was starting to pass, judging from the size of the waves, which were still high enough to break over the bow. But at least we weren't having to make those steep climbs and gut-punch drops anymore. Just before I climbed back down under the canvas hatch to the galley, I saw someone climbing up out of the engine room. Lightning cracked overhead, lighting up his face. It was Woody, who I hadn't seen in a couple of days, and not much at all since we'd left New York Harbor a week earlier. That's how it was with the engine room crew. They were like trolls down there in their dark dungeon. The ship slammed through a wave, and water rolled down the length of the ship, knocking Woody off his feet. He wasn't in any danger, but it must have hurt when he landed because he didn't have a life vest on for protection or to cushion the fall. "Hey, Woody," I yelled over the howling wind. I carefully made my way back to check on him, but before I could get there, he staggered to his feet and stumbled over to the rail, without a safety line and still without a life vest. "Stop," I yelled. "You idiot, it's not safe." Woody turned to face me. He must not have known I was there before because his blank face crinkled up into a grin and he lifted his hand to wave, as if he were just on a street somewhere and happened to run into each other instead of in the middle of a still, raging ocean storm. I didn't have time to say anything else because just at that moment another wave hit the ship and swept Woody over the side. "Man overboard," I shouted as loud as I could. "Man overboard." And I kept shouting it as I unclipped myself from the safety line, grabbed a life ring, and made my way to the rail. I searched for Woody until I saw him waving his arms frantically as waves crested over him. I looked around and saw nobody. I kept yelling for help and started to go find somebody, but I knew if I didn't do something right then and there, Woody wouldn't survive. I was so scared that I actually wet my pants, and then, whispering a quick prayer, I jumped over the side of the ship to try to save him. That sounds pretty crazy to me. That's the end of chapter 14, and now we're ready for chapter 15. I hope that you guys are enjoying this book as much as I am. I'm still struggling with all the wording and stuff, but we'll get there. It's a good story. It's a good book, and really hope that you're enjoying it. You guys stay safe, be good, behave, be nice to one another, do kind things, stop fighting with your brother and your sisters. Okay? I love you, and I can't wait to see you again. Bye-bye.